this chapel. What a privilege to share worshiping with you. Yes, I had the thrill of a lifetime going into the deep interior mountains of Papua New Guinea and living with the Duna people of that country. Are you able to see them on the screen? Yes, there they are. Aren't they good-looking people? Yeah, a tribe of about 20,000 people, as isolated from the rest of the world as any group could be. No roads leading back into those interior mountains where they lived. Their language was not written, no alphabet. And among other things, they were a monolingual society, didn't know anybody else's language, and nobody else knew theirs. And most important of all, they had never heard of God and his son Jesus. They lived in great fear of the spirits, and I have here in my hand a spirit stone from that tribal group. It's actually rock material, but as you can see, it's perfectly round, just like a cannonball. When they're broken open, there's a reddish core right at the center, and I've been told by knowledgeable people that that is iron ore that has been attracted to the center of these balls. So apparently at some point this was molten rock. My best guess is it's a product of a massive volcanic explosion called Krakatoa that occurred in the South Pacific in the late 1800s. But that's my guess. What I do know is that when the people were clearing the forest to make new gardens, once in a while they would find one of these unusual stones. And so they believed that spirits inhabit a stone like this. So they take these stones and put them in a special place in their homes, and then if a child got sick or some other calamity arose, they would bring these stones out of their homes, call for the spirit men. These are the men that know how to talk to the spirits. These men would come, take a pig, kill the pig, and take the pig's blood, and pour it over these stones, and rub the stones with the pig's blood while they pray to the spirit that is angry for some reason. Please accept this blood we're sacrificing to you. Don't be angry. Let this little child live, or whatever. So that's what we found when we went to live with these people. One of the spirits that they feared the most is the spirit that they believe inhabits women. They believe that women have a deadly spirit that's capable of attacking her husband. Awesome. I'm not going to comment on that, of course. They believe that that spirit could attack her husband and cause him to shrivel up and die. And so we found that no husband would let his wife live in his house with him for fear of this deadly spirit. Well, of course, my wife and I didn't know these things when we went to live with these people. So our two children, my wife and I lived together. We lived in a little dirt floor, grass roof house. These people are what you call an open-faced society. They don't have secrets. Everybody knows everybody's business, and so they leave their houses open all the time. And so that's what we did also. So they came into our house in large numbers to check us out. As you heard, these were virtually a Stone Age people group. They had no metal, even our axes made out of stone. So of course our pots and pans and virtually everything we had was of tremendous interest to these people. So they would come into our house in large numbers, sometimes crowding into the kitchen part of the house so tightly that it was hard for my wife to make her way around to fix our meals for us. Well, then they would go into the pantry and talk about these cans on the shelf. We had to supplement their diet. Their diet's about 90% sweet potato. So for the sake of our own health, we had to take in powdered eggs, powdered milk, canned meat, things like that. So they would go through these cans on the shelf and talk about what was in each of these cans. Now, when we first arrived there, our daughter was only 5 months old, so we had taken little bottles of Gerber baby food with us. Now, we didn't think about it at the time, but you know, those little bottles had a picture of a baby on the side, and I'm very sure we didn't know the language, so we didn't know what they were talking about. I'm quite sure they were quite concerned about what it was we were eating. Well, then they'd go into the children's bedroom and talk about these mosquito nets and all these strange things. Some of the people became very knowledgeable about us, so they began to serve as tour guides, and people would come from long distances to get the tour of our house. It became kind of like the Disney World of the area. Well, the tour always ended in our bedroom. Long conversations in our bedroom. At that point, we didn't know the language, so we didn't know what they were talking about. We just took a long time in our bedroom. Later, we found out what they were talking about. They were saying to each other, how can he do this? How can he let his wife live in his house with him and not get himself killed? So that was a big puzzle to everyone. Now, I must say, these people were delightful people, and we just came to admire them. They have many features of their culture that are superior to ours, I'd have to say. But I do also have to say that their culture, just like ours, just like all human culture, has been scarred by sin. And one of the great sin scars in this culture was the horrible relationship, particularly between husbands and wives. We found that men beat their wives often, and the slightest provocation, women would get beaten. Occasionally they would have mass beatings of women, where the men would get together and talk about which of the women are getting uppity and need to be humbled. And they would go and grab those women, drag them to some central location, strip their grass skirts off of them, and whip them with stinging nettles. I wonder if any of you have ever known about stinging nettles. Have you? A few of you have, yes. I have also. A vine about as thick as my small finger, covered with a furry material, and I know by a very painful experience that if that fur even barely touches your skin, it will raise a welt and it hurts like it's on fire. So it's hard to imagine the terrible pain inflicted on women as they were beaten with these stinging nettles. I've been there about 6 months, and I remember saying to my wife one day, I don't think marriage in this culture has anything to do with love. And we lived there over 10 years, and I'm quite sure that was a correct assessment. We never saw anything that even hinted at kindness, much less love. Men just beat their wives often, and quite viciously. Well, I'm happy to tell you, there came a day when, for the first time in history, these people came to understand that God made a blood sacrifice. Only he didn't kill a pig. He sacrificed his son, the only son he had, whom he loved. And I'm telling you, that message really connected with these people. You know why? It's because they have always known you have to shed blood to get forgiveness. They know that better than we in the West know it. But they were stunned that God would sacrifice his own son. Now, these people tend to make group decisions. They're not individualists like us here in the West, where we each do our own thing. But it takes time to make a group decision. So once they heard this amazing truth, they talked about it around the fires in their houses at night. And they talked about it for about 2 years. And then they made their decision. And about 2,000 of these people brought these spirit stones out of their homes by the hundreds, and in special ceremonies, they smashed these things to pieces. And they said, we will no longer sacrifice to the spirits. From now on, we're going to follow only Jesus, because his blood. Amen. Because his blood has been shed, so our sins can be forgiven. Wonderful thing. Now they really wanted to know how they were supposed to live. Now that they had given their stomachs to Jesus, I failed to mention that. In that culture, if you're going to give Jesus everything, you don't give him your heart. That's nothing but a muscle that pumps blood. You give him your stomach. And mind you, they were really serious. They had to be. For them to smash these spirit stones, see, some of the old spirit men warned them, don't do that. If you smash those spirit stones, the spirits will be furious, you'll have a disaster. So for them to go ahead and smash these things to pieces, like, that's burning all your bridges behind you. You're committed now, you can't go back. So there's no question, they really wanted to be followers of Jesus. But they had a problem, and they knew it. And the problem was, they had no idea how you're supposed to live when you give your stomach to Jesus. But by that time, they found out that God has a book. And that book is full of all the information about how you're supposed to live when you give your stomach to Jesus. And they said, hurry up. They said, why does it take you so long to learn our language? Our language is not difficult. Even small children can speak our language. They said, we want God's carving. That's what they call writing. We want God's carving so we can know how we're supposed to live now that we've given our stomachs to Jesus. So we began translating the Bible into their language for the first time. We started in Genesis. I had 9 men sitting around the big desk as we began translating Genesis chapter 1. We went through chapter 1, it went quite well. Went on into chapter 2, and it went smoothly until we got to verse 24. And I'm telling you, Genesis 2:24 exploded like a stick of dynamite among those 9 men sitting around that desk. You're familiar perhaps with those words. We use them in weddings often. It goes like this. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall do what? Cling to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Can you understand why that stunned those men? They're sitting there hearing this and thinking, oh my, we don't cling to our wives, we beat them. They were just shocked. They had to find out what God intended the marriage relationship to be. They didn't say anything to me, but they could hardly wait for us to finish translating that day. And as soon as they finished, they tore out of there and went straight to the old graybeards, the old wise leaders of the tribe. And these men had also smashed their spear stones and wanted to follow Jesus. The younger men told the old men what they had just heard in God's carving. The old men were shocked also, and they came straight to my house. By that time it was evening. We had our door closed for privacy. That was culturally okay. They block up their doorways at night, mainly to keep warm. They didn't know anything about knocking, but they called me inside the house and said, come out, we need to talk. So I came out and we went over to my little study and sat down. And with very long, sober faces, they said to me, we've been told that in God's carving it says that back when he first made the man and the woman, he wanted them to be like one. They said, we've been watching you. We noticed you let your wife live in your house with you. We don't let our wives live with us. And then they said to me, tell us, do you think the way we live is not pleasing to God? Now that's a pretty heavy question. Because now we're talking about culture, and the missionary better be mighty careful not to impose his own culture on people. And you know, if you check Genesis, you'll see that Abraham and Sarah had separate tents. I don't think it's a big deal to God for a husband and wife to live under the same roof. We all know you can live under the same roof and hate each other. What matters to God is that husband and wife love each other whether or not they live under the same roof. So here they are saying, do you think the way we live is not pleasing to God? And I answered them carefully, and I said, I only know this much. I know that when God made the man and woman, he wanted to love each other so much, and because they love each other so much, they become very close to each other, and they become like one. Well, they didn't say anything. They just got up quietly and walked out, and I had no idea what they were thinking. Now, as I say, they don't make fast decisions. So they talked about that for about 6 months. You know, you don't want to do anything rash like letting your wife move in on you without giving it a whole lot of thought. So they talked about it for about 6 months, and then they made a decision. They didn't tell me what they decided, but they decided to conduct a critical experiment. So they began building a new house. Now, these people don't live in villages, as separate houses scattered all over the countryside. They began building a new house out in the middle of a sweet potato garden within sight of my house. And I watched them day after day as they made progress building it. I noticed they built it differently from any house I'd seen them build. I know I've seen hundreds of houses. They always build a house the same way. It's a house about 30 feet in length, about 12 feet in width. It's all one room. There's a door only at one end. But as I watched them build this new house, I noticed they built it differently. They built a 30-foot house, but then they put a wall in the middle, dividing it into 2 separate rooms. And then they put a door at both ends. Can you guess what they did next? They took a Christian man and his wife, they put him in at this end and her at that end with a wall separating them. And then everybody watched him closely to see if her spirit would attack him through that wall. They watched him for about 3 months. At the end of 3 months, the man was doing remarkably well. So they got up with their courage and they went in there and they ripped out that middle wall. Very scary. Now, husband and wife living together. They watched him more closely than ever. But again, another 2 or 3 months went by, no harm to him. And so a doctrine was born among these brand new baby Christians. They never consulted me about it. Very important doctrine. It goes like this: if a man truly gives his stomach to Jesus, God sends his great and powerful Spirit inside that man's stomach. And God's Spirit apparently is more powerful than any other spirit, including this deadly spirit women have. And so a Christian man can live with his wife and doesn't have to be afraid. Wonderful. Christian couples begin living together. Not a big deal. What is a big deal is that my wife and I having breakfast one morning, we saw a Christian man and his wife walk down the trail past our house. Noticed he had hold of one of her arms, was helping her walk. She was pretty sick, yeah, but in that culture, sick or no sick, if you're going to eat, you have to go to the garden. And so, unbelievably, he went out to that garden and spent the best part of the day in that garden doing women's work, and he took quite a bit of punishment for that. Some men walking by ridiculed it, saying things like, "Oh ho, so we see you're wearing your grass skirt today, are you?" And that's an insult to a man. The amazing thing is he took all of that guff and stayed right there and kept telling her. And I'm just telling you, my wife and I began to see profound changes, not just in individual lives, but in some of the fabric of the culture. Not because we enforced change, but because the Word of God came to them and they understood it for the first time in history. But the main thing is, folks, we need to get people all over the world in contact with God's Word. It's alive and powerful. We witnessed that among the Duna people of New Guinea. Thank you so much.